Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we're exploring the new route handlers for building API routes in Next.js 13, and I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students, and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. I've got Visual Studio Code open and a terminal window as well, and we're going to create a new application to explore the route handlers in Next.js 13 today. So I'll go ahead and enter in npx create next app at latest. I'm going to name this one Next07 just to add to my series. You can name it whatever you want to. TypeScript, yes. ESLint, yes. Source directory, we're going to say yes here, and this is a change from what I've done before, and I know I've had a few comments where I've created some confusion. You can use source directory with the new app directory. I have just emphasized that app directory in the past. However, everything is going to be inside the source directory, and after that it will be the same. So you'll see what I mean if you look at the file tree after we create this project. I'll go ahead and take the default there as well. It will create this new project, and we'll get started with Next.js 13 route handlers. I'm in the Next.js beta docs, and as we see here under API routes, it says API routes have been replaced by route handlers in Next.js 13.2. So the old API routes are still supported in the pages directory, and of course that no longer exists when you install a Next.js 13.2 project. However, it says they recommend using route handlers with the app directory instead. So that's what we're going to look at. Let's go ahead and click on route handlers. And as we bring this up, I think this example can be just a little confusing, so I want to talk about it here. It talks about route handlers, and we create route.ts, or JS if you prefer, but we create those files inside of the app directory. But what it doesn't show is an API directory here, but typically we're still going to create an API directory to put those in. You don't have to though, so I'm not saying you have to. It's just that normally we would do that to organize, but we're going to have that API directory inside the app directory, and that's what you get when you start an example Next.js project anyway. And there is a note here about the route handlers as well. They have these good to know notes throughout the beta docs, and they are good to know. So it says route handlers are only available inside the app directory. So you're not going to try to create one of these new route handlers outside of the app directory at all. Again, when we look at the example project, there is already an API directory inside the app directory. So now I'm back inside the new example project in Visual Studio Code, and notice we have this source directory since I said yes to the source directory this time. And when we open it up, inside we have an app directory right away. So everything that you see here now is inside the app directory, which is inside the source directory. And that's the difference. And one of the things we have is an API directory that's already provided. And notice it has a new directory named hello. So this is the /API/hello route. So let's look at this route. Note in this example GET request, we notice it's a GET request right here. They give the request object here and the type. However, you don't really need that, so we can just remove it, and this route will be statically evaluated and not dynamically. And we'll talk about what dynamic routes are here in just a moment as well. But this means there's essentially no variation in the request or the information that we depend on from those incoming requests. It's always going to respond in the same way. And without that information, it can be statically evaluated. Now, to try this out, we're going to need to go ahead and start our project. So I will go ahead and open the terminal, and then I'm going to say npm run dev, but we're not going to need to bring up the front end example page or anything like that. I'm just going to keep it running here. And this is a back-end API endpoint, just like if you were to create a REST API, essentially. So we can test this out with something like Postman, or if you have the extension installed, Thunder Client. And I have that right here, as you see in my activity bar. If you don't, go to Extensions and then search for Thunder Client. I think, is it one word or two? It's two words. So if you search for that, you could find this Thunder Client extension and install it. You can see I already have it installed here. And so I'm going to close out of that. But if you use that, that's what I'm using today. So now that we've started our project, let's go ahead and create a new request. And here it has the thunderclient.com/welcome. We don't want that. We're going to just have HTTP on our local host instead of HTTPS. and then 2 slashes, localhost port 3000, and then we're at API/hello. And that should be sent to that hello endpoint that we have right here. If we look back in the file tree, we're at API hello, and then the route.ts essentially fills the same role for an API that the page.tsx does when we're looking at different page routes. But you cannot have a route.ts in the same directory as a page.tsx. You don't want to have a route and a page in the same directory. So now let's go ahead and run this with ThunderClient. I'm going to send the request here and we'll see the response we get back. I'll drag this up. We're not sending any parameters in the URL either. So we send this and we get hello, Next.js, exclamation mark right there. And that's what we were expecting to receive because you can see how this endpoint sends that response. Now we're back in the beta docs, and I'm going to scroll down just a little bit here on the same page where we were looking at route handlers, and we see static route handlers, and that's exactly what we were just working with there. They are statically evaluated when using a get method, and we don't really need that request object in there. So that's why we removed that. Just as we see with the example, it's not in here. So that's what we want. But what if we want to send JSON back? Notice they're using a NextResponse. And the reason we're going to use that, we'll scroll down just a little bit further, a TypeScript warning here in the beta docs. Although response.json is valid, we're going to have an issue with it with TypeScript. So for now, we need to use nextresponse.json. And they've extended the response type. They've also done that with request, but we don't need that at this point. So let's go ahead and now put a JSON response in our hello endpoint, and we'll need to use this next response as we do it. Back in VS Code, let's go ahead and import our next response at the top. So I'll say import curly braces and next response, and that comes from next/server. After that, we can go ahead and use that response instead of the response we have here. So we'll just copy that and paste it in, but then we're going to say .json, and now let's send a JSON object. So what we want is curly brace, and then I'm going to send message in quotes, and then our response message here would be hello Next.js, and then another curly brace. And you can see I've still got a red squiggly because I need to remove the new keyword at that point. So let's save this. Everything looks good. Let's go back to our ThunderClient request tab here, and we'll send another request to that endpoint. And now we get our JSON response here. Okay, I think we've learned enough about our example hello route that we can create our own new route now. So let's select the API directory here. And then inside the API directory, we're going to create another new directory. So instead of hello, let's call this one echo. And let's create an endpoint that echoes whatever it receives, or it echoes the parameters that it receives at that endpoint. And we weren't sending any parameters with this request, so that will be something new as well. So now let's create a new file inside of this echo directory, and we'll call this route.ts as well. So you can see it follows the pattern just like we did with our pages and always creating page.tsx files. So I'm going to start by importing that next response once again. And after that, we'll go ahead and type RFC to get a export default function here. And I'm going to make this an async function as well. So I need to put that in. And then I'm going to rename this, and it's going to be get once again for this route. And actually it doesn't even need the default for a route. So we can just go with export async function and get. Now we want to go ahead and put in the request object. So we're going to say request in lowercase, and that's going to be a type. It is the request type, the request object here. And now we want to echo any of the parameters that might be sent in the URL for a GET request. So to do that, we want to get the search params. We're going to destructure those. So we'll say search params, and that's going to equal a new URL. And inside of this, we'll pass in the request.url. So now we've defined the search params that we are receiving. And when we look at what type the search params are, you can see they are URL search params. And you could look that up on MDN as well to learn more about that. But what we can do is use a get method. So if I say const name equals search params dot get and then pass in name, it's going to return the value for name if that search param exists. Now I'm going to copy this down and do one more. And here I'll call this instrument. So we're going to get the name param and the instrument param if they exist. After that, we want to return those. So let's go ahead and create this response. I'll get rid of the div that we have here. And instead we'll have NextResponse.json. And then we'll pass this object here that is name and instrument. So let's test this out now and go back to our new request. And instead of the hello route, we're going to go to the echo route. Now we can add parameters here in Thunder Client below, but you'll see them get added to the URL to see how that's created as well. So let's go ahead and add the parameter here. And the first one was name. So I'll put Dave, and notice it's being added up here. So the first one you would have the question mark, then name equals Dave. Now let's add another one. I'll need to drag this down. I'll have instrument equals guitar. So then there's the ampersand, and then you put the next param and have that equal the value. So now we're sending both of these params in the URL, and that's how they would be received with a GET request. So let's go ahead and send this and see if it works. Yes, they were echoed back to us, name and instrument. Now the downside here is this isn't flexible. It has to be name and instrument. It's not going to echo any other params. It's only expecting those two when we look at the route we created. So now let's modify this so it will echo any param we send. So I'm going to leave these individual lines that we're no longer going to use and just comment them out so you could see them inside of the source code for this lesson. And I'll copy that down so I can comment one out as well. And now let's go ahead and get the search param values in a different way. So I'm just going to define, I need const, there we go, obj for object. I'm just going to define a basic object here, and I'm going to use object.entries, and then inside of object, oh, I said entries, it needs to be from entries, pardon me, and then inside of that I'm going to have my search params, and I'm going to call the entries method to get those values. So now we've got an object that has those entries. Okay, so now our response needs to be different as well. Instead of this object here with name and instrument, it's just going to be whatever the object is. Now this will echo any params that are received. And just to verify that works, let's go back to our request and let's change these. This could be nickname and this could be hobby. And now let's go ahead and send these. And yes, it's echoed instantly, nickname and hobby. So any params we send, we could change this once again to last name, and let's change the value also. So here I'll put gray, and over here we could do something else like code equals often. There we go, send. And it still works. So it's going to echo any params that are sent. And we're back in the beta docs once again, and now we're looking at dynamic route handlers. It says route handlers are evaluated dynamically when you're using the request object with the get method. So that's part of why we removed it before. Remember when we saw this request and the request type with our get request just for that hello example, and we didn't need that. So we removed it so it would become statically evaluated. However, with the request object, get methods are dynamically evaluated. Any of the other HTTP methods, so post, put, delete, options, etc., any of the other methods are going to be dynamically evaluated. And then also when you're using dynamic functions that use cookies and headers, and they give some examples. So I thought about what could be just a good example of something you would frequently use one of these other methods for, like post, and I think it would be to evaluate some form data. So let's go back to VS Code where I have a form ready to go. Okay, we're back in VS Code, and you can see I am not in the API directory that's underneath app, which once again, I should remind you, you don't have to create an API directory. It just seems like that's the best way to organize it. And that's the example the Next.js gives us, of course, when they create the hello route that your example project usually comes with when you do the install. However, here we're in the app directory, and now we're back to pages. So I have a feedback route that has a page, and then a thank you route that has a page. And on the feedback route is where we have a feedback form. Now, this is a React form. I've got other tutorials on my channel that go about creating forms in React. If you're interested in that, and the change event handlers, all of those things. I assume you've already done some of that if you're at this Next.js level of the series. So I'm just providing this form. You can look at it in the course resources. But once they fill out the form, then they would be routed to the thank you page, of course. But it is going to submit here in the handle submit. It's going to send this to our feedback route that is at API/feedback. So that's the route we now need to create. So let's go ahead and go into the API directory, create a new directory named feedback. And inside of this feedback directory, we'll create a new file, and it will be a route.ts file. Let's once again start by importing the NextResponse that we're going to use. And after that import, let's create a type. So our type will be feedback. We'll set this equal to a type that has an optional name, which would be a string. And now I'm going to use Shift Alt and the down arrow twice because we'll also have an email that is optionally there, and we'll have a message as well. So this is our feedback type. It will have a name, email, and message all coming from our form, and they might be undefined. Now we're going to require them in the form, so I'm actually being just a little safe here in saying that they might be undefined, but we'll go with that. And now we'll say export async function, and this will be a post request that we're going to receive. It will still have the request object though, and we can just use the standard request instead of the next request, but that is also available to us from Next.js. Now let's define the data that we're going to receive, and it's going to be of the type feedback. We'll set this equal to await request.json. Now this is different if you're used to working with, say, a framework like Express, and it took me just a little bit to get used to it as well, because I'm used to getting things from the request.body. So this, all you need to do is call JSON here on the request itself. So just a little different. Now let's go ahead and log to the console. Now remember, this is on the server side here. This is our back end. So when we log to the console, this will show up in the terminal window. That would be the console for the server. So we'll log this data. After that, we can get the name, email, and message. We're destructuring now from that data. And once we have that, let's go ahead and, well, we don't really need to log anything else here. I guess we've got it all above. So you could log any one of these just to confirm you're getting a value if you want to. But then let's go ahead and return our next response.json, and this will have the name, email, and message that is being sent back. Now, of course, at this point, you could process the form data. You could save it in a database. You could do anything you want with it. We're just going to respond, again, kind of echoing that same information, just to show how this post request is received and how it works and how you can get the data out of it. Okay, I need to open a terminal window and restart the server here after I added Tailwind to the project with that form I added. So I'm going to go ahead and type npm run dev. If you don't have yours running, go ahead and start it as well. Once we do that, we're going to now go to our localhost 3000 in the browser with control and a click. And then we want to go to our feedback page. So we need to go to that feedback route that we created. And here is our form. Now I'm going to open up the console here too, because I put a couple of console log statements in that as well. So now we could just put Dave, or I could add Dave at davegray.codes, and then I can just say, hey there. And now it's ready to submit. I submit, and yes, we got our thank you for your feedback page, but we also have the object here in the page.tsx. So this was logged in the front end. And then we have what is received. This is also in the page.tsx, but it's received. It's the result from the request after we get the request back. So that's that JSON that's sent. Now let's go back to VS Code and we'll look at the terminal and see what we got there as well. And you can see here we had the data logged as well. So this is the console log message that is inside of our route here for our feedback as well. So now we close this out and you can see where we logged that data. So that's how the post request works with the form. And of course, you can look in the course resources and look over that form on the front end part for React as well. That is a client side page, by the way, because it's interactive. So at the very top, you need use client, as any page needs to be that has that user interaction. So pointing that out as well. But back here in the API, we created this post route now, and this is also how put and delete and the other methods would work besides get. So I wanted to make sure to show you both get and post. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, and thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.